Good day, radio friends, and those viewing via the World Wide Web. We welcome you to another edition of Marriage Encounter. We're delighted to be with you, and we trust that you are indeed enjoying these discussions. Last week, we ended on a very interesting note. We're talking about differences. We're talking about when couples have the inability to deal with differences and its impact on the relationship. And last week, as we closed, we were talking about the whole matter of differences in value systems. A man goes out and he decides he's going to come in at 10 o'clock, at 12 o'clock, as he so desires. So we're going to pick it up there after a word of prayer.
Let's pray. Father, we ask for your blessings today as we share. We thank you for what you've done over the years that we've been doing this program. And we ask, God, that today will be another wonderful discussion where our couples and those watching and listening can glean nuggets that will be helpful and valuable for the benefit of their relationships. Bless Dr. Greene and myself, and we thank you in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen.
Doc, you know, sometimes you do hear, I mean, those of us who are in counseling situations do hear from time to time, a man comes in at ungodly hours, and the wife asks, well, you know, how are you out for so long? So, I'm a big man.
You do what I want to do.
I do what I want to do. I make my own decisions.
Right.
You know, that is kind of sad. If you believe that there are no limits, I mean, I'm introducing something here, but if you believe there are no limits, then you have a challenge.
Yeah. You do, and not just limits, but you're dealing with also responsibility. You know, in relationship to the management of a family and of a relationship. When you get married, you're no longer only thinking about you. You have to think about the other person. And if there are children involved, you have to think about the children also. So, you know, I think that it really boils down to the word that we used at the end of last week's session, Doc, and that's the word respect. You know, in terms of a value or principle. How do you respect this relationship enough to make decisions that are going to be beneficial for the relationship?
Well, I was thinking, as we ended last week, Doc, that one of the reasons why a man, or woman for that matter, may be coming in that late, or an excuse that he or she may have is, well, we don't do anything together, you know, you don't ever want to do, you don't have any interest in what I have interest in, so I find my own activities.
Okay.
You know, and this is when my activity ends, so this is when I come in.
Okay.
So it's interesting. And there is the thing where you have differences, and rather than appreciating the differences and learning to live with the differences and making them complement each other, we decide to go walk two different roads in the opposite paths, opposite directions.
Yes.
And what that does is that it creates space between you. And we say whenever there is a lot of space between the two of you, it's so much easier for intruders to come in.
Yeah. You know, I think, you know, again, you know, so important because, you know, the discussion on values can also be considered as, values can be also considered as very personal. A person kind of thinks that this is what made me who I am today, kind of a thing, you know, and I've never run into any problems with this. But when you look at the bigger scheme of things, you may be able to recognize, or at least you should be open to the fact that there can be a better way, you know, and principally, you know, when you look at it from a principled, objective position, you can say, you know what, you're making sense. You know, this value of respect, you know, I respect you enough to want to be here with you at a particular point in time. Understanding a woman's greatest need is that of security. For a man, I respect you enough that I want to be here to provide that security for you. I respect you enough, not just for you, but for the children, for the family, and to guard, as one author says, guard the avenues of my own soul, because being out at, you know, at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning exposes me to so many things that may not be very beneficial for a successful relationship.
Correct.
You know?
And at the end of the day, one should value his or her relationship enough to want to build that relationship. And it's about making your marriage a priority. If you get to the point in your marriage life where you don't care any longer, that should say to you as you reflect, hey, I need to get help.
Right, right.
Because you may not be enjoying the relationship, and that may be why you're doing what you're doing. But there is a better way. There's an alternative way. You can enjoy your marriage. I want to say to somebody today, Doc, this sounds like an appeal, but it is. Because somebody may be listening out there who may be thinking, my marriage is over.
Yeah,
I want to
yeah.
suggest to you that you can get help.
Yes.
You can, with discipline and counseling, and the willingness to sit down and reconsider, you can end up in a situation where you have a truly successful, meaningful, and fulfilling marriage relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Doc, I've worked with different couples, and on occasions you will hear a couple sort of a remark. One of the things that they have had to learn to do is to recognize that the other person has their own way of doing things, their own opinions. And it takes some level of maturity to appreciate this, to accept it, and then to function with that understanding. Just that ability, that alone is really powerful in helping couples to move forward in the journey. Because if you can't get to that place, then obviously you're going to have some significant challenges. And so those differences, while they are present, they can be negotiated, meaning that you can negotiate around them to make the marriage work.
Some of the things we fight over in marriage is not worth it. It's really not worth it.
Not worth it at all.
And people have preferences, and if I sit down a certain way on the sofa, or I may choose to sit on the floor, and you think, oh, sitting on the floor is not a good thing. At the end of the day,
what turns on that, man? What turns on that?
It's not worth it. You ought to smile at certain things and move on.
Yes.
And deal with more important matters.
Yes.
So it's important to know, Doc, and I just want to share a nice little quote that being different should not be a problem in your marriage, right? In fact, it should be a benefit. And last week we spoke about some benefits, looking at the positives that come from the differences. How do I use what you have that I don't have to my advantage, to the advantage of the relationship, right? I may be a very outgoing person. I may like to entertain, and you may be kind of withdrawn and reclusive. Well, if you're one way all the time, life becomes boring and monotonous. Right. So you do need the blend. I may need my spouse to say, you need to cheer up, you need to smile some more. Or my spouse may need me to say, you need to calm down.
Calm down a little. Get too excited.
And so it complements, and that's the idea. Look positively at the differences and make them beneficial to the development and enjoyment of your relationship.
Right. Okay. So as we continue, we could look at under the heading of the inability to live with differences. We can also look at what we consider to be avoidance of conflict. And the fact is, we are definitely not clones. We heard about Dolly the sheep many years ago, who was a clone. People feel very strongly about how life should be lived, and they will often try to resolve differences. Some people afraid of conflict, and they don't want to engage in conflict. And we're talking here under the overall topic of our inability to live with differences. So, in that context, then, should we avoid conflict?
Well, you cannot. I would like to say up front, you cannot avoid conflict if you are alive. There are several definitions of conflict, right? But for our purposes, if both of you want to occupy the same space, which is a space that can only be occupied by one, then that's a conflict, right? If you have differences of opinion on a particular matter, and you are strong on which opinion matters, then that's a conflict. It really is unavoidable. And two individuals coming from two different backgrounds, two different, well, we like to say sexes, male and female, you are going to have some conflict. Conflict, I'm going to say it, Doc, conflict is not a bad thing.
Right. Well, you answered the question before I asked, because I was going to just, a lot of people see conflict as only negative, purely as negative. But conflicts actually help people to understand each other more.
That's right.
And I always say, much of the research and statistics say that people who learn to deal with conflicts actually are closer together than those who avoid conflicts.
Without conflict in life, we really wouldn't grow much.
Wouldn't grow, yeah.
Right? And so conflicts serve, well, more than one purpose, but in that regard, it's a very useful purpose.
Yes.
Because it matures you.
Yes.
And it gives you the ability to be able to reason. It develops patience.
Yes.
It creates greater perspectives. And so you ought to, now the reality is, you may be coming from a home of origin where all people do is either to avoid or to run from conflict. And when that is the case, and you go to a marriage where a conflict is always a big red flag, that something is going to go wrong, my marriage is going to fall apart, and this is going to be the end of the world, then these individuals will be forever running from conflict and never willing to stand up and confront an issue and work it out.
I like to use the example of that big piece of machinery called an airplane that goes into the air. And it's a conflict of sorts. The reason why a plane can lift and rise is because of the friction that is created by the thrust of the engines against the air. And, the plane needs that resistance in order for it to rise. And in the same context, conflict is a certain resistance, if you want to view it that way. But being able to overcome it can cause you to improve. It causes you to get better. It causes you to be able to see things from a different perspective. And so, conflict can be very, very beneficial, particularly when you've learned how to address it properly. A lot of people run away from conflict now because the end result of conflict is usually big arguments, big falling outs, and a lot of distance. But when you learn how to do it properly, you mature in the management of conflict, you will learn that you end up feeling so much closer to the person because you realize now that, hey, you know what? We really want the same things, even though we may go about them differently. And once we recognize that the end game is the same, and we just kind of navigating and negotiating ways to get there together, that can be such a beautiful journey. When
I was a child, we used to play with magnets. I don't see children doing that.
Not much these days.
It's a different generation altogether. We used to play with magnets. And we discovered that, when you turn the magnets a certain way, there is a little resistance. You may want to call it a conflict. And you try to push them together. Now, the bigger the magnet, the more force you have there. And you let go one and it flips. Right? And it used to be fun for us doing that. But somebody came along, maybe even before my time, of course, but, realized that that conflict created by the differences of charges and the polarity in the magnet can be harnessed to create useful energy that can do something. And so much of life and the machinery that we have today are built on those things. So the point I'm making here is that if we can find useful things to do, if we can look at the advantages that we can gain from a potential conflict situation, when you realize that you have a conflict situation and you can work through it, it should move your relationship to another level.
To a different level, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's the idea. Moving the relationship to another level. And again, it helps you to understand each other better. Because what the conflict situation may do is that it forces you to stop, to reflect, to reason, and to sort things out, which is a very useful exercise. Yeah, very, very useful. So as we continue this discussion, there are persons, well, let me address this. While conflict is present, it is difficult to feel
connected. All right. So while conflict is present, we understand that it is difficult to feel connected. Hence, this consideration when you come to the place where there's a conflict, how valuable is it to work through it so that you can feel connected again, or you can bring about connectedness? And that is a very critical component of the journey when we're looking at the differences. So we're saying that do not allow the difference to stay. Do not allow the difference to fester. Do not allow the difference to grow. Take time to intentionally work through the difference so that you can address whatever the difference is, and you can find a way to move forward. Too many people are content to leave those differences, scattered all around the room, and eventually you're going to end up tripping over those differences, and it's going to make your relationship that much more difficult to enjoy. So what we're saying is, understanding that differences are real, taking the time to learn how to address those differences, and then, removing those differences from the room of your life, you can actually do a lot to enhance your relationship.
No doubt. I want to just step back a little bit, just so that our viewers and listeners do not get the wrong impression. Mm-hmm. Because we are not in any way suggesting that you necessarily have to give up your opinion.
Correct.
In order to have a meaningful marriage. If your spouse has a different opinion, it's not necessarily about, both of you can agree that, we have differences of opinion on this and still live a fulfilled and meaningful life. You do not have to say, okay, I was wrong here, necessarily. You may be convinced that your perspective is right. But to what extent are you able to have a difference of opinion with an individual and still sees value in that individual, still loves and respects that individual, and are able to have meaningful interaction with that individual? That's called maturity.
Yes, very much.
So we don't see eye to eye on this one, but we're not going to make make us enemies.
Right.
You may even say, let's shelve this and come back to it a little later.
Time.
Let's sleep on it and come back on it a little later.
Yeah.
That's called the maturity. It's not downplaying something, it is not ignoring it, but it is recognizing that maybe I'm tired right now and maybe I'm not reasoning properly. So let's agree together that we're going to shelve this, we're going to put it there, and tomorrow we're going to come back to it, and maybe we will have different perspective. Yeah. And lots of times when you come back, you say, it really isn't a big deal after all.
Right. Or you may identify where the issue was and be able to resolve it very quickly. With a little rest. So, yes, definitely, I do significantly agree with that point. So differences, they're real, they're present, they are unavoidable, and we must learn to work through the differences.
I know we're not necessarily extensively discussing conflict now, but since we are on it, there are 2 points I want to make. One is, Doc, that the marriage is not good. Conflict does not necessarily define the quality of one's marriage.
Okay.
The absence of conflict, or the presence, let me say, the presence of conflict does not say that you do not have a good marriage.
Good point.
We didn't make the point that conflicts can be good.
Yes.
So if you have conflicts, and again, we're going to say you will have conflicts in your relationship. Have you ever, let me speak for myself here, because, I've grown beyond wanting to decide what tie I wear, Right. In fact, Saturday mornings I'm going to church, I'll say to my wife, this is the suit I'm wearing, give me a tie.
Right.
And that ends
it. Sort you out.
Right? Yeah.
As you would say.
That ends it. But you may be able to identify with times when, you look at your spouse and you say, no, I don't like that at all. And your spouse says, well, I really like it. And that could be a conflict. What do you do? Give up? Do you fight? Do you say, I'm not going anywhere with you in that?
Right.
No, that would be a very foolish thing to do.
Correct. Correct.
So somebody may need a little lesson in dress and combination of colors and appreciate that. And if you approach it the right way, it could be a learning and growing experience for you.
Right.
So having the conflict can be a meaningful thing and a positive thing in your relationship. I wanted to make that point.
Yeah, it's a good point. And the question is, how open are you to being, to allowing somebody to share something with you in the context? And are you stuck in your way that you can't listen to what somebody else has to say? Because it's not healthy for the journey of a relationship. The ability to be malleable, the ability to make the compromise in the context of the journey of the relationship is important. Because as I said before, you're no longer living by yourself. You have to get to the place where you're willing to consider the opinion, the ideas and the thoughts of the other person. And while you are an individual, and while you are a person, while you do have your own views and ideas and so forth and so on, that ability to have that connection with the other person and allow that other person to also be a part of the decision-making process, I think is very, very important too.
The second point I wanted to make, Doc, rather, it's really not my point. I just wanted to highlight a little quote here from Cloud and Townsend. Make conflict your ally, not your enemy. Right? And then they add, it is the iron that sharpens your marriage. Right? It is the iron that sharpens your marriage. So don't run away from conflict. Make it an ally, something that can benefit you, something that can make you grow in your relationship. When I was a child in primary school, I still remember, we used to call it infant one in those days.
Yes.
That may be the kindergarten class. And we used to either use stones or the covers for the bottles, the soda bottles. And we would have to put 3 plus 2, and we count them out. Some of those mathematical problems seemed really, really difficult. You may consider that a conflict, you may disturb your mind. But as you conquer it, you grow to the point where somebody comes to you today and says 3 plus 2. You don't think about it, you don't calculate it. It's just automatic that you answer. And so overcoming one challenge prepares you for another and makes you stronger. And after a while, some things that used to be challenges are no longer challenges at all. In fact, you find that those are so trivial. Why, do we fuss about them?
Well, again, it's your background, right, and where you've come from. And sometimes you need to relearn. You need to have a reorientation about things that are really important and things that are not so important, and, how you can utilize the benefit of the other person to bring about balance in your life, so that, you don't end up spending a lot of majoring in minors, we would say. You don't end up spending a whole lot of time in things that are really not that important, and in the journey also damaging your relationship. So, viewing conflict from the perspective of how it can help you to grow, I think, is probably one of the most powerful things that we can do. As a matter of fact, I was thinking that, as we shared on the program today, people may be wondering, like, well, you are talking about conflict. How can conflict be good? And having been through the discussion now, I'm hoping that person can see the value of conflict and how it does and indeed can help us to grow and to be more successful in our relationships. And that's what we want. We want growth. We want growth.
Let's use an example, because somebody may be challenged by it, So it's time for your son or daughter to go to school, to university. And you're in the process of deciding, with your child, of course, where they wish to go. And the child may say, I want to go to this university. Or you may have encouraged the child, I went to this university, I want to go to this university.
Right.
I want my child to go to my alma mater,
Yes.
And you feel good about it.
Yes.
And when your spouse hears about it, your spouse says, no way. So we have a conflict now.
Yes,
right?
yes.
We have a conflict now.
Yeah.
Now, if not handled correctly, that can be a challenge.
Yes.
With every conflict, if you don't handle it correctly, it can be a challenge.
Yeah.
But look at what a positive experience it can be for you now to enter that arena and say to your spouse, I want to share with you my concerns regarding this particular institution, you know, and here they are. And then that will lead you to begin to think about the discussion on what you want for your child and the environment you want your child to live in. And it can become a very enriching discussion that can make you both grow as opposed to fighting over a situation.
And you don't want fight, you want growth. I think of, you know, persons who in their journey struggle with that ability, you know, to see to see the reality of what this conflict can do for us, as opposed to seeing it just totally in its negative form. Some persons, Doc, they actually, you know, they sort of turn off whenever they sense a conflict arising, because they have maybe been so traumatized by previous conflicts. So we want to encourage persons, you know, engage the conflict, but do it in a way that's going to be healthy and helpful to your relationship. If it is creating significant damage, then you may want to, as Dr. Greene has indicated, get some additional help. You may want a third party to come in to help you to view it a bit differently, but by and large, you know, that conflict can be helpful to you.
And I think that's wise counsel, because, you know, Doc, every situation is different, and so we're not prescribing that you do this all the time, but you may find that you are not making progress, and sometimes you may want to stop and go back to it a little later. And if you realize it is creating too much of a strain on your relationship, you ought to be able to be mature enough to come to the point to say, maybe we need some additional help with this one.
That's right.
And then you can agree together. Now, some persons have developed a habit of fighting and arguing so much that agreeing who you're going to go to might itself be a little
create the problem.
You know, but you do want to be able to discipline yourself. And, you know, some marriages have fallen so low. But then when you get to the point where you eventually decide we're going to get help, and you expose all the issues and work on them, you realize that a lot of times the challenge was not that there were conflicts, but it's just that you had some bad habits, some terrible unresolved issues that you never addressed. And sometimes the conflict may be driving you to address these things. Well, that's all our time for today. If you have questions, comments, or concerns, Marriage Encounter at slcadventist.org. That is Marriage Encounter at slcadventist.org. Please drop us a line. Let us know how meaningful this program has been to you. We would be delighted to hear from you. That's all our time. God's blessings.